I've been told by everybody up on this roof that they're all off the roof. I am on the roof of exposure 4. Got fire through the roof of the fire building in the entire rear section.
Now remember, given the payday, has he been accounted for? Okay.
610B. That was the Mayday. 610B.
I'm here. We got a fire. 1.5-story, single-family dwelling. Fire shown from the second floor. Give me a second alarm on this.
Coming up to the top floor. I got people hanging out the top floor windows with a baby.
Commercial building. A lot of fire, a lot of smoke. Go ahead and strike a third alarm on my orders on this.
Got people on the front fire escape here with windows vented below them. We need somebody up there.
Yeah, let them know we got a job. I'm pulling up now. Second alarm, I got a 1-story single-family frame. Heavy fire showing from the attic.
So we're using all hands. We got one line stretch, fire on the 4th floor, second line being stretched. Primary searches are underway.
Well, welcome back to Old School. I'm Rick Lasky, along with my buddy John Salka, and we've been fishing through our topics and not wanting to repeat anything. John, one of the things we do need to look at, buddy, I've had a lot of people, I don't know about you, I've had a lot of people when we talk about old school have asked not necessarily to go over and cover a topic again, but expand on it. I mean, we try to keep these between 30 and 35 minutes-ish, sometimes a little bit longer, but sometimes a little bit less, enough for somebody driving to and from work or working out or checking the rigs and all that stuff can listen. But that's been a question, John. So maybe, in the near future, we just need to go through that list and go, and I can bring back a couple of suggestions from people, but there's been a couple of them where you and I have talked about, hey, we need to do this again, or we need to continue this with a part 2. And I don't think we've gotten it because we got all these great topics all the time popping up. It's like, oh, let's do this one, let's do that one. But, a couple of people have, more than a couple have asked about, maybe going and adding on to one. So I think we need to take a look at that and go from there, buddy. What do you think?
I think it's a good idea because obviously, I mean, we've been doing it for a while now, but we put a lot of thought and effort into the topics that we pick. Most of them are pretty, I don't want to call them meaty, but they're good. They're good topics for the typical average firefighter or company officer. So revisiting them is good. Just if for no other reason, some time has gone by and maybe some other events have taken place or some other lessons have been learned, and we can bring it up again.
Exactly. And things are always changing. Times are always changing. I mean, we've been doing these since, since May of 2019. So we've been doing them for a while, and, we've, and I'll just say this, we've made it through COVID, and all that stuff, but we'll go back and look at those. So for our listeners, we'll go back and we'll knock a couple things out for you. FDIC is coming up in August. So we hope to see you there in Indy, and then it'll be back in April again after that. We got a ton of stuff going on there as usual, but speaking of FDIC, John, one of the programs we're going to be teaching again, and they asked us to put it in for our program request for 2022 as well. We do the 3 Degrees of Mayday is a workshop, a breakout session on Friday. We're in the big room with Bobby and John Norman and Bill Gustin for after hours on Wednesday night.
I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun.
Oh yeah. I'm doing Sweating the Small Stuff, mini workshop for the women in fire on Monday, but Monday we're doing our Chief Officer Field Training Program. The program is that you and I came up with, buddy, if you remember, it was, and for our listeners, we've been doing company officer battalion chief leadership training for decades, literally decades. All right. We start teaching the first 5-alarm leadership program. Golly, buddy. 90s and FDIC, so on and so forth. So that being said, all the company officer stuff, again, for our listeners that we've been doing, now a lot of those company officers that have, were promoted, lieutenants, captains, like, hey, we're looking to, I'm either promoting to or get ready to or whatever, or test for battalion chief. And there wasn't a whole lot out there, John. And you and I,
and you've said that for years at a lot of different classes that we do. You're like, I mean, obviously the chief, but chief officers in general, beginning with, I mean, let's face it, if you counted chief officers in America, there's probably more battalion chiefs than any other rank of chief because it's the lowest level. They're the ones still out in the field, and they get the least training, not just battalion chiefs, but chiefs in general. But battalion chiefs are still out there with the boys, and when we put this class together, obviously we've both been that, I'm 17 years as a battalion chief. There's so many things that only the battalion chief does. You
Right,
know,
right.
I mean, we could talk all night about company officers and all that too, but there's so many things that only the battalion chief does. They're at a pretty unique spot in the hierarchy, in the chain of command. You know, at least in field units and in the field end of the fire department, right? So yeah, it only made sense that eventually people started asking about it, and we said, yeah, that makes sense. The audiences are a little smaller. Obviously, there's not as many chief officers as there are lieutenants and captains nationwide, but we've had some very good. I think we had some great discussions and some good classes.
Well, we just did the one in Alpharetta through CSU. And, you know, and like you said it perfectly, John, there is a ton of firefighters. And then there's a enormous size group of lieutenants and captains. And then it drops off like, I mean, dramatically to the shift chiefs, the shift commander, district chief, battalion chief, whatever you may call them in your department, that actually run, you know, the shift. Not necessarily, you know, a deputy assistant or an executive, you know, level chief, you know, that's working Monday through Friday, but someone who's running the shift, you know, that field general, if you will. And, you know, so granted, a smaller group, like you said, John, but there wasn't anything out there. You know, there's this fire chief academy, this and that. Well, you know, I've been doing that, but you know, answered the bell and did it again. And I thought Alpharetta, what a great group. We've been there a couple of times, been there for the company officer academy. Now we went back for that. Isn't that a great group of people there? First of all, we love Georgia, but Alpharetta, Georgia, and we had people from all over, you know, the country there. But I mean, they're an awesome host, are they not?
Yep. The last couple of classes have been great. Spartanburg, I really had a lot of fun down there too. That was another great one. We've had a couple of. We started up in a real good way since you know, the break from COVID, and you started up earlier than I did. But those were my first couple. You know, Colorado and Spartanburg and Alpharetta. It's been very good. I was very. It was nice to be back on the road. I hate to say that, but it was nice, you know.
Yeah. Oh God, it's just the energy. You and I are just. This is, you know, it actually, in its own weird way, not only did our country go through a pretty challenging time in the fire service, a lot of people went through horrible times with this and all that, but you know, it's been so nice to be back on our own. Firefighters are loving the training. They want to get back out there again. But so we're doing our 4 hour out of the 2-day program, the 2-day Field Chief Officer Training Academy. We're doing a Field Chief Officer program at FDIC, and it's a 4-hour program for our listeners on Monday at FDIC, and we'll be doing it again in April. Bobby asked us to do it again. But John, how about for this particular show? Let's talk about. I think we just talk about this. I don't generalize it, but let's talk about the successful battalion chief, the successful BC, because you and I have both had battalion chiefs that have worked for us. You as the battalion commander, those that, you know, were in your battalion that, you know, and, you know, the commander is just that you've talked about before. There's a commandant or commander over rescue one, a captain. There's a captain, you know, the captains in the BC. There's one that, you know, is in charge. Well, explain real quick for our listeners, because a lot of young guys and gals are interested in the FDNY, the difference between Battalion Chief Jones and Battalion Commander, the commander of the 18th Battalion. What are the duties? What's the commander in charge? Why do they have one?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask that because just yesterday I ran into a couple of paramedics here in town. They were out driving around, and I happened to be where they were, and we started talking. And oh, how you doing, Chief? Good. What's going on? And the one guy was a FDNY buff. You know what I'm saying? He had ridden with Mickey Convoy and stuff, and you know, he's like, and he asked me that question. He said, you know, I saw you battalion commander. I read that book. What's the difference? And it's actually pretty simple. It's a pretty simple explanation. And I actually wrote an article about it one time as well, as talking about the structure, the rank structure. So like you said, whether you have 3 shifts or 4 shifts, whether you volunteer or career, like when I was in Mineola, I was a volunteer in Mineola, Long Island. We had a 2nd lieutenant, a 1st lieutenant, and a captain. There was a captain there. Wasn't really known as a company commander in a volunteer fire department, but he was known as the captain of Truck 2, right?
Right.
And that was the hierarchy there, including the lieutenants, 2nd lieutenant, 1st lieutenant. There was a little hierarchy going on there too. Most career departments, there isn't. Most career departments, it's either we're all captains across the board, which is which was one of the points I made in the article that I wrote, how really sort of ineffective and wasteful that is to have equal ranks across the board. You know what I'm saying? And then somebody said, well, the battalion does in New York City. And it was a great point. New York City does. Each battalion has 4 battalion chiefs of equal rank making the same pay. But one of them, based on seniority, is designated as the battalion commander. And the same thing in divisions, which is the rank above the battalion in New York City, and lots of other places have that as well. It's still a field level chief officer, still works the same shifts as firefighters and company officers. And they have 4 deputy chiefs, but the senior chief is a division commander. That's what Jay Jonas is retiring from.
Well, let me ask you real quick. Let me interrupt you for a quick second. I got a question. So what if they got the most senior BC doesn't want to be the battalion commander? Says, look, you know what? I'm happy just coming in. Can he turn it down into the next?
Absolutely, absolutely. And another thing that came up during my tenure actually came up when I retired. I retired, and you hold on to your battalion commander designation until you actually do retire, because there is a small stipend with it. For years there was nothing. You get the exact same pay as everybody else. And about 10 or 15 years ago, they added some money to it. So anyway, then they were in the process of selecting a new battalion commander. And it should have been by seniority. It should have been my mutual partner, the guy that I worked the most with, Bart Todd, great guy. And not only did he not get it, he didn't know that they were filling it. They never even spoke to him and skipped him and offered it to the guy below him, which absolutely, I don't want to say it wasn't correct, because they're allowed to do that. They can select anybody they want. Generally, tradition is seniority, but they didn't. And I actually called up and I spoke to a couple of people. I said, that's just really not right. I said, for a fire department that has such a good handle on everything else that we do, to flub that, to flub that little operation, and never mind not picking him, at least have a professional, process, and call a guy up and say, listen, are you interested in being battalion commander? Yes, no. If you're not, okay, thank you very much. We wanted to offer it to you first. You're next in line. And then you could go to the next guy with no problem. And if he did, and if he was interested in it, then maybe you have a little decision to make. Then maybe you're going to have to now listen. It's not a test. It's not based on qualifications. It's based on who the folks right above you want to deal with. So I guess they wanted to deal with the other guy. But so that was a really long first answer to your question, and I didn't answer it. Yes. So the answer is, if you have 4 battalion chiefs and one of them is a battalion commander, he essentially is the same as a company that has 3 lieutenants and a captain. He is he's the commanding officer of the unit, even though he's of equal rank. And I wore a silver oak leaf instead of a gold one. The other 3 chiefs wore a gold oak leaf. I wore a silver. In a division, the deputies wear eagles, but the division commander wears a single star. It's the only guy that wears a star in the FDNY that works shifts, But anyway, and you're the one that sets policy. You're the one that has some input into officers, vacancies in the battalion, things of that nature. So it's not a gigantic administrative load, but the administrative end of it is really why it was creative, to make sure somebody's there saying, hey, let's get all the reports in. Hey, let's get that job done. Hey, let's do some training around here, or whatever it is.
It's almost like being the chief of a department. I know there's deputies above you and everything else, but it's like, yeah, I've got 3 battalion chiefs that work for me in all these stations, and it kind of, the hierarchy's there.
I've said that 100 times. When I was a battalion commander, it was like being the chief of department of the 18th battalion.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I had 3 firehouses, I had 6 companies, I had 125 firefighters and 30 officers, and that's like a small department.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, so when we do our program, John, we start off talking about like what it takes to be the BC, studying and getting into the right, timing has a lot to do with it, the right person. Not always, we know that. Sometimes promotional systems promote people that may not actually be the best candidate, but most of the systems I think work. Most of them work well. So let's talk about that. Let's kind of throw that out there at first before we start picking it apart a little bit. In general terms, all right, let's go to I know what I looked at as a chief of department when it came to the battalion chiefs working for me. What did you look for? What did you expect, and what did you look for from? We're talking a successful battalion chief. What did the battalion commander, John Salka, look for from his BCs in order to be able to say, I'm looking at 3, successful battalion chiefs working for me? What were some of the traits you looked for, some of the actions?
For the company officers, is that what you're asking?
No, for the battalion chiefs. What were you looking at as, what were you looking at that, that told you, what signs did you see? What traits? What made for the successful battalion chief working for you?
I'll tell you, it was always interesting because as not only as the battalion commander, just being a battalion chief in a New York City Fire Department, obviously the other 3 chiefs in my battalion, take days off, go on vacation, whatever it is once in a while. And once in a while, all of a sudden, a strange face walks through the door. And he's a battalion chief, just a covering guy, maybe a newly promoted guy. So you get to see, sometimes you get spoiled because you get the 2 or 3 guys that you work with all the time, and they're all great, and the place is running like a well-oiled machine. And all of a sudden, some guy shows up for 2 weeks to cover Billy Byers' vacation, and then you discover, wow, every battalion chief isn't, as well versed and well experienced and all the things that my chiefs were. So I'll tell you, one of the things that I think is the most important is you gotta have to be a good battalion chief, first level chief, district chief, battalion chief. They call it different things in different places. You got to be a good communicator. You got to be able to talk. You got to be able to ask questions. You got to be able to really step in when something's going on. Most of the time, and we've laughed about it right here in previous podcasts about how, when you're eating lunch and they're joking around, how you're saying nothing. You don't jump in on that kind of stuff. You just sort of listen because you're the chief now and you don't want to jump in. So there's a lot of times when you sort of got to zip it and you got to, hold your comments. But there are selected times where the light's on you. Bink, the spotlight comes on and they're all waiting to hear what the battalion chief's got to say. So, obviously operational, obviously at the scene of an emergency. If you don't say anything, and certainly in my fire department, I imagine it's true in most other fire departments. If you get somewhere and don't take charge, somebody else does.
Right.
Everybody's not going to stop working and stand there and look at you and say, "What do you say, Chief?" They're just going to roll in and go to work. So battalion chiefs have to be ready to jump in and say, "Hey, I'm here now. 1H here. Listen, 45. Pull out. Go to the building next door, or 88's going to back you up, or whatever it is. So but it's not just operational. It's other times too. There's times where you have to step up and jump up and speak up. If company officers are maybe sliding a little bit, maybe not doing what they're supposed to be doing, because and I know I've said this 1,000 times in 1,000 different classes and different stories about how I never yell at firemen. I've never yelled at a fireman. I yell at officers. Those are the folks that are on my plane. Those are the folks that I pay attention to and I straighten out and give instructions to and try and be helpful for. It's company officers. So you got to have a good rapport and be able to good communicator with your company officers.
Well, and obviously, I mean, you want someone that knows, like you said, how to run a fire scene, an accident scene, a large scale incident or whatever, to do that stuff and be able to train those below him or her to be able to do the same thing once they get into position when they're acting battalion. She's like, where I'm from, that kind of thing. All right. Obviously, we want someone who's a good leader. You said someone who's a good communicator that, knows where to and where not to insert themselves. I think, John, it just is important when we're talking about those leadership traits. And we've said this before, someone who's organized. If anyone, we talked for decades about how the company officer needs to be organized and needs to be detail oriented and all that. I think the battalion chief has to be that and more, because you're that step. Yeah, you're that next step. And, now, and pretty much everything going through that captain lieutenant's office is coming through yours for a signature, whether it's performance evaluations or disciplinary issues or whatever is coming through there. As bad as it is, I think, John, for a captain or lieutenant to be disorganized or show up late, to be tardy and not talk to the guys and gals, and the only time they see is at lunchtime when there's a call, so on and so forth. I think the same thing goes for the battalion chief. And we how many times we said for the company officer, your guys come first. It's always about your people. The men and women that work for you come first with all your decisions, with all your actions, with everything, the whole servant leadership thing. Well, now you're not just I guess you're not just the mom and dad watching over the kids. You're the grandparents now. You're the grandfather, grandmother going, okay, you know what? I have to take what I learned as a parent, and then what I learned as even a child before that, and take care of the adults in the situation. You know what I'm saying? Because you said already, the battalion chiefs, are, those captains, lieutenants are taking care of their firefighters and doing with that. You've never had to discipline or talk to a firefighter. That's their job. So, and it's kind of weird, some people think grandparents means you're old. I think more from a tenure aspect that, all right, the battalion chief, now that's what you are, man. You've got the adults, you've got the adults running and supervising and taking care of, the firefighters, that kind of thing. And you've got to be organized. You've got to be, if anybody's got to be dialed in even more without meddling in their business, without micromanaging, you've got to be organized. It's even more so. I think if the battalion chief doesn't have the thought process that the guys come first, it's like Bruno used to say, you can't poop up. You know what I'm saying? It goes downhill, and I think the company officers will be affected by it as well. And you're going to have company officers that don't, you and I've walked into it, and you go, that old saying, you follow ugly kids, so you find ugly parents. You find company officers ain't doing their jobs, and company officers, that don't care about their people, aren't organized, and kind of running camp run amok. Wait till you see the BC. I can almost guarantee you 99 times 100, the BC is going to be the same way, because just like with the captains, lieutenants about the firefighters, if you have a misfit group of firefighters that aren't doing their job, the majority of the time I haven't seen anywhere else. The captain, lieutenant ain't doing their job. I'm sorry. I just don't think a group of children are allowed to act that way unless the parents allow it. Same thing. If you got company officers that aren't being supervised and led and mentored by the BC, same thing, right, buddy?
And you know what it's like? It's a lot like a sports team. It's a lot like a football game, right? You see that head coach on the side, that's the battalion chief. He's not the chief of the department. He's the battalion chief. There's an owner there, and there's all sorts of other people, but he's the battalion chief. He's on the sideline. He's not actually out there running around on the grass, but he's still got cleats on, and he probably used to run out there once himself when he was a younger man. He was probably one of the players and that. Now he's on the sideline. Same thing with baseball. You get the pitching coach, you get the manager, the bench coach. So you got that. That's the staff in there, right? And you're not actually doing it, but most of the time, most of those folks used to do it, and they got a great knowledge of the job, a great knowledge of in that case, the sport or the game. And what you do is you're calling a shot from the sideline. You see the guy, you see the batter sometimes looking back at the dugout or the pitcher and everybody. So you're heavily involved in what's going on, and you're not even in the picture frame. You're not even in the camera. They might not even know where you're sitting in the dugout. The same thing with the chief. You're standing across the street watching a building burn down, and there's all sorts of people in there. All the pictures are being taken, videos being taken. In the bottom corner of the screen, you see a white helmet comes in the picture a little bit. Oh, it's the chief across the street watching the whole thing, So we're very involved, but it's sort of like a, laid back a little bit.
Well, we've talked about before, almost like, and not to demean it, the BC or the chiefs are kind of like the puppeteers. They've got the strings, and they're kind of guiding and helping, move the company officers kind of around where they should be, and then the company officers are the ones that are actually ensuring that their firefighters are doing what they're supposed to do. But you're right. It's, obviously it takes someone with leadership skills, and that's like 10 shows we've done already about what it takes to be that great leader. But someone has leadership skills. Someone understands a battalion chief, what it means to be, just like as a company officer, what it means to be a supervisor, to supervise your company officers, and then to manage stuff, to manage everything. Some of these BCs, you've got money, you've got budgets, you got people, you've got policies, you have procedures, you have disciplinary issues, apparatus, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. Who's getting overtime? Who's not getting overtime? How we covered sick time and all this different stuff, and a lot more interactions for a lot of departments, which are HR departments, so on and so forth. So obviously you have that whole leadership side, right, and which encompasses the supervisor, manager, and again, ultimately the leader. If we break that down even further as to some of the things that allow and assist the BC in becoming successful, we'll just sum it up that way, being that good to great leader. We talk about in class the importance of, and you said communication. I want to key back to that because that's so huge, and that's one of the biggest complaints you and I see. What's the biggest problem department? Lack of communication. Well, not knowing how to communicate, let alone how to get your message apart and so on and so forth, across as the BC is huge. But you're not going to do that, John, if you don't make calls. You're not going to do that if you're not training with the men and women when you can. Obviously, you can't be there all the time. You're not going to do it out mentoring. You're not going to, if you're not out there building a team. But How about station rounds? And this is something we focus on with our battalion chief school, the importance of the BC making rounds. And I'll say this before you start. In Louisville, when I got there, they didn't really have that opportunity. And I changed it where I said, every single day, I don't care how big, I don't care if it's midnight, you will make your state, you will stop by every firehouse, check in, sign off on the book that you were there, meet with your officer or whatever. It doesn't matter. How important are station rounds in your eyes, to the BC?
Visits are important. It was always, I don't know if it was always my favorite thing to do, but as I grew, as I got more time in the job, I used to enjoy the visits more because number one, you're getting to, sit down. Like I just heard some people talking online earlier this morning, a Zoom meeting going on in a place that I'm involved in. And guys are saying, oh man, I wish we were all sitting in the same room looking at each other. It'd be easier to have this conversation about this policy that we're talking about. And of course I agree. And I discovered that as well at the job. It was easier to go sit over at 88 Engine with Timmy Klett or with the captain and talk about this new thing that was coming down, or the decision was made, or the new bunker gear, or whatever it is. It was always not only easier, but it was more complete. I thought it was a more effective way to deal with people when you're sitting having a cup of coffee, whether it's up in the office or down in the kitchen, whether it was something that you could be talking about with a couple of officers and maybe a couple of firefighters sitting there cooking a meal, like that. It didn't matter that it wasn't private or not. Compared to talking on the phone. You can call anybody you want. Some guys are desk jockeys, they're sitting at the desk and they're picking up the phone. They call this guy, pick up the phone, call that guy. The phone rings, it's the other guy that they called earlier. They do 10 things on the phone and they never get up from their chair. And I'm not knocking that because some guys, are very good at doing a lot of things. Number one, I like to get out of the office, like to get outside and see what's going on in the street. And number two, when you're visiting the firehouse, you're doing more than just talking to the officer. You're doing more than just visiting the firehouse. You're looking at the rig. You're looking at the condition of the guys. You're looking at the gear that's hanging on the side of the rig. You're looking at, there's snow chains and it's April and snow chains are still laying on the side of the apparatus floor. You're looking at a lot of different things when you make a visit. You're not just there for whatever reason it is that brought you there, So I think the station visits, we call, it's taking out the bag. We're going to take out the bag, meaning we're going to go to all firehouses, pick up the papers, drop off the papers. And sometimes it takes you 3 hours for 4 stations because you end up getting in the conversations. Hey, Chief, hold on a second. We heard that they're out at the Rock, they're doing this, or they did something today out there. And that was other than actually being in my own firehouse for the evening or going to a job. That was always the next best thing, was just driving around, visiting 48 Engine or 88 Engine. Listen, I covered for a couple of years before I got a spot. You could be in a firehouse you've never been before in your life, and it was still an interesting visit because you get to talk to people and see sit down with them in the kitchen and check the rig out and everything else.
Well, you get to kill off a lot of rumors too. I mean,
absolutely.
They go, hang on, you know what? Salka will be here. He's always here at 9:30. You just wait. He'll be here. We'll ask him when he gets here. You walk in, hey, Chief, what's going on? Chief, you got a minute? Hey, we've been arguing about this all morning. We heard, that I love anything that starts off that way is usually BS. We heard, or, exaggerated, that blah, blah, blah. And you go, no, that's not true. That's not what they said. I was sitting in a meeting. That got a blown up proportion. Here's what happened. Straighten that stuff out here. That kind of stuff.
And that's true in every organization in the world. It's the lack of good information. The lack of keeping your people informed is what produces bad rumors.
Oh, absolutely.
If you don't pass information down, then people start making stuff up. Not even maliciously necessarily. It just happens during a conversation. Somebody says something, said, yeah, I thought I heard that too. And before you know it, like the telephone, game where people relay back and forth to each other a message or a word and how it changes. So again, the battalion chief is the link. Now, company officers, obviously, they work with and live with and sleep with and eat with and go to runs with their firefighters. Battalion chiefs, we're not on that rig. We may go on runs with them, but we also go to the division. We go to division meetings, the division conferences, and then we bring back information. So battalion chief is a link between headquarters and the upper echelon and the folks that are doing the job in the field. So everybody really is looking. You hear from battalion chief, it is so. It is correct.
They're the linchpin. Yeah. They're the linchpin that's holding everything there with all their company officers on the, it's that whole, you're going to disseminate that information, and then your captains and lieutenants are going to do it. And hopefully, the firefighters will get the right story. So making rounds, I mean, like you said, kills off the rumors. It helps really establish that line of communications, heads off a lot of problems to pass. And the guys get to see the chiefs. And you said, you just size up your guys. You look at the station, their gear, their apparatus, their tools, how the firehouse looks, gives you a great read on the guys and gals.
You remember the story I told you one time? And again, I hate to say this over and over, but I keep saying it. I've said this in a lot of different classes, this little story, but I remember one time I came into work and was relieving a chief. I can't remember who it was. And he had visited 88 engine and the reserve engine. New York City has a series of engines, the 500 series of engines. Those are reserve engines. They're fully equipped, fully loaded with hose, masks, SCBA tools, nozzles, everything is there. 5 guys could walk in the front door and drive out of there half an hour later as a company, right? So they're stored around the job, around the city in different firehouses where there's room. And it's just a 500 engine. So I think it was 505 or 508 or whatever the number was stored in 88 engine. And so I come into work one night, the battalion chief was going home. One of the regular guys says, man, 508 engine wasn't an 88 engine. I stopped by there today and 508 was gone. I said, really? Wow. I said, when was the last time you were in 88 engine? Oh, I don't know. It's been a little while. I said, it must have been a little while because it's been gone for 3 months. 508 engine hasn't been there for 3 months. You just discovered that today, So I wasn't busting the guy's chops. I was kidding around with him. But the point is, what about all the other things that were going on there for 3 months that he didn't see because he didn't stop by? He didn't see people coming and going or the condition of the place. And even just like that chief, he never stops by, So sometimes things happen at a place when they know nobody's going to be coming by versus somebody be here tonight,
The Alamo, the last outpost where they think you're not coming by. So station rounds issues. We talked about being a good to great leader, being a good supervisor, good manager, taking care of stuff, and a good communicator. Station rounds, we don't need to really get into too much, but I know it's important enough to mention though, making calls. And I've said this before, maybe not all the big, if you're out and about and you hear an engine taking an alarm or a gas leak call or truck, if you're out there doing it, you kind of slide over. You don't even have to go on the air. And I just thought, John, it always gave the BCs a good chance, to, as you turn the corner, see if all your guys are dressed, if they got their tools on, where the rig is positioned, where do they stop, what do they do? It's one thing you show up at a report of a fire, a job, whether you have something or not, usually it's not anything, but you get there, whether it's a fire or not, you're seeing them all pulling up and they're doing the routine. They know you're there and all stuff. But those single engine responses, like when you're in the neighborhood, just to slide over, not micromanage, just, it's the same thing, John, like making rounds. You walk in the firehouse, like you said, you take a look how they have their gear stowed on the rig next to it, the tools and stuff. Just as important, sometimes you got to make the boring calls. Hey, turn right, go 3 blocks. They're up here at a gas leak call. I just want to see where they park the rig. Or I just want to see, maybe you haven't seen Rick in a while. Hey, Rick, hey, come here. What's going on, man? No, nothing. Hey, how did the softball game go? But it gives you a chance, I think, John, to really kind of take a look and see away from the big calls that they're still in the good routine, like your guys. So I take that picture, 45 engine with the guys geared out, air packs, radios. They know I'm just saying, I hate that BS call phrase, but they know it's a BS call, but they're standing back of the engine, ready to stretch 2.5 at a BS call, dressed, ready to go, good. And I just think making calls once in a while gives you an opportunity, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I never received the call. I was never assigned on a box that I didn't go to. And apron runs. People use the term apron runs. They pull out. Somebody told me one time out in Staten Island somewhere. I hate to talk bad about anybody, but somebody said, "Oh yeah, I went to Staten Island covering. I was a lieutenant. I was covering. A couple of times we got to run at 2:00 in the morning, and the rig started up, pulled out on the apron. I was like, "What are we doing?" Hey Lou, we're Fort Dew. It's like 6 miles from here. It's always a false alarm. It's just that veterans hospital, and and depending on who the boss was, he might say, "Well, I don't do apron runs. Get everybody on the rig and we're leaving." You know what I'm saying? And the same thing with chiefs. Sometimes chiefs start to go slower or maybe not roll out the door on something like a gas leak or an odor or whatever it is. And I loved going on runs. I told people 100 times, I don't drive 60, 65 miles from my house up in Orange County down to the Bronx to sit in the firehouse and watch the Yankees, although I did that plenty of times. I did it to go on runs. That's what I went to work for, to go on runs. I love going on runs, no matter how inconsequential or no matter how small a routine they sounded. So that was never a problem with me. I don't think it was a problem with anybody in my battalion. I have never heard, there isn't even a rumor of anybody in the 18th Battalion doing apron runs. Everybody went on every run, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, so like we said, making rounds, making calls, training. Obviously, the battalion chief can't make every freaking drill. BCs have a lot of work to do, a lot of other stuff. but it's still important to make drills. And I don't think not with the same company only all the time. You got to switch it up, right? You got to,
Right.
whether you get involved in a drill or you just show up and you watch, you observe, or some. I know some chiefs have like they come walking in, they got their gear, they put their gear, and they're doing an SCBA maze right in front of the guys, And some come by, grab a cup of coffee, sit in the room, just listen to what's going on, see how it's being taught, and everything else. Just as important to show up for training once in a while, right?
Right, and I'll tell you, it's very important. Training is, you and I, right? That's what we're doing right now. Training is important. However, at the battalion chief's level, at the chief officer's level, driving around in a buggy in a chief's car, like, it's not your job to be organizing, scheduling, and conducting training. Some people think, oh, the chief does a lot of training around here. Again, that goes back to company officers. Unless you don't have company officers, which is another whole situation that's, would have to be dealt with. If there are company officers on duty, if there are company officers in the volunteer fire company, those are the folks that should be developing training, putting it together, conducting it in the firehouse. Chiefs have to be an important part of it. You can't say like, oh, the officers handle that. I don't need to be at the training. You being there and participating and commenting, you evaluate your officers, see how good they're doing, see how the firefighters are doing. So you need to be part of training. But I always like to make that point that you need to step back a little bit and you need to develop your company officers so they can actually conduct it and put it together and research it and present it in a professional manner. And like you said, you stop by when you can, one night this firehouse, maybe the next day to the next firehouse. And the FDNY made a change about 20 years ago in that regard. Used to be a chief would go by a firehouse whenever he could, or he'd call up a place and say, listen, I'm going to come by for drill tonight. And of course, and I'm not saying anybody deliberately didn't train, but I'm sure there were companies that if they didn't get the phone call, they pretty much knew the chief wasn't coming by for drill. So they might or might not have drill. And the guy who got a phone call from Chief Salka that says, I'm coming over for drill. What time you figure? Oh, about 8 o'clock, Chief. They knew at 8 o'clock I was going to be there and they were going to be doing drill. Well, 20 years ago, the FDNY changed that and they put an assigned drill period on the day tour and the night tour. And if you work 24 hours, it could just be an assigned drill period in the afternoon or the evening, whatever time they select. And that was it. That was the new established drill time. Daytime was 2 in the afternoon. Nighttime was 7 p.m. And you know what? Now I didn't have to make a call. And now everybody knew they were expected to be training at 2 o'clock and at 7 o'clock. And I can stop by anywhere I want at that prescribed time. And unless somebody was out on a run, guess what? It made life easy for me. Now, I didn't have to tiptoe around and make a call to make sure somebody was training when I showed up. I could pretty much show up anytime, and they knew that too. So it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a discipline issue or anything like that, but it sort of got everybody more in a routine of training every day at the regular prescribed time and sort of expecting, you know what? The chief might be by. And I thought that was great. It freed it up for me too. I was able to be around. All I got to do is look at my watch on the way back from a run and say, hey, Jack, it's 2:15. Stop by 48. They should be drilling right now. And we stopped by and sure enough to be on the apparatus floor doing something. So I thought that was a good change that the department made. And when I asked during class time, doing seminars, a lot of people say, no, they don't have a prescribed time. They just do it when they can fit it in. And that takes that whole element away from the chief now. Now the chief's got to make phone calls to arrange a drill to visit, so I thought it was a good idea.
Well, I think it's a great idea. So, not that you don't, trust guys, but there's, I think firefighters do well when there's a format, when there's a process. I've said it for years. You have too, that firefighters want to be led. They want SOPs, SOGs. They want rules and regulations, labor contracts, volunteer charters, all that stuff. And they want you to tell them what to do, then get the hell out of the way. The firefighters, they want a system to work in. I think, John, when they don't have it, and they'll step up and they'll do their job, of course. But, I think they love it when they've got, here it is, man, just give it to me and, let me roll.
Yep.
So obviously it's impossible in, 30 to 40 minutes to cover everything with the successful BC. And we've been trying to hit some of the highlights. We mentioned the leader, being a great leader, a good supervisor, good manager, great leader overall, communication, station rounds, making calls, training. They were organized. The guys came first, last couple of things here, John, the whole mentoring aspect as a battalion chief, mentoring your captains, lieutenants below you. So one day when they step up, I think some people, I don't think as many people, John, do it to hold on to power anymore. I don't think they do it as much as they just don't do it. They don't prepare the people coming up. They don't do the succession planning. And I think we're hurting ourselves by BC's not taking time to mentor those that below them, right?
Absolutely. And that's an ongoing process. You do that during station visits. You're doing that at drills after a fire. You're doing that during, really every encounter that you have with officers in some way, shape, or form. Even if you don't have an official mentoring program, you are mentoring people. They watch you. They notice how you work and how you talk, how you're dressed, how you respond, if you turn out quick. And that's a great habit to get into, to measure what you do, to make sure you're doing everything right, because you got to know that officers model themselves after you to some degree. Obviously, every battalion or every department has some guy that looks like Joe shit the rag, man. He's, whether he's a chief or a captain, and oh God, he's working again tonight. But for the most part, everybody falls into their proper roles, and they do the right thing. And what I wanted to mention was, and I didn't mention it yet, but I'll do it now because we're getting close to the end here. I wrote down a couple of things before we started, and one of them was keep your distance. Now that sounds a little rough around the edges, but it's really not. Making battalion chief from a company officer rank is very similar to making lieutenant from a firefighter's rank. It's a big change. You're not in the boys club anymore. Even, firefighters are firefighters. When you make lieutenant or captain, obviously you're not one of the boys anymore, buddy the boss. But when you go from company officer to chief officer, when you go to lieutenant or captain, whatever the ranks are, structure, when you make chief, battalion chief, district chief, you are not a company officer anymore. You're not riding in the rig anymore. You're not one of the boys anymore. And you really got to pay attention to that. You have to consciously take a step back. You can't be sitting there on the couch every night at baseball time, watching every game with the captain and 10 firemen and having fun and drinking sodas and, and I'm not trying to be a killjoy or a stick in the mud here, but you have a new job now. And now you're not only overseeing whole companies and whole alarms, 3, 4, 5 companies, maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 people inside a burning building. You have to be able to discipline people. You have to be able to give instruction to people. Mentoring is what you just said. And you just can't be somebody that's always kidding around and laughing and being treated as an equal when you're not an equal. When you're a supervisor, you're a company officer's boss. You know what I'm saying? And I know it's modern day now, and nobody likes these delineations. Nobody likes, oh, you're the boss and who you work for and who you work with and all this other nonsense. Listen, if you're a battalion chief, you're the boss. And you got company officers that you're going to have to give instructions to. You got company officers that you're going to have to tell things that they're not very happy about. And if you're always, holding hands and cuddling and laughing and being buddies, it's hard to do that. You're just going to make the job harder for yourself, or you're going to make it impossible, and you're not going to be able to do it. So I always like to tell guys, once you make battalion chief, listen, you had a good run as a firefighter. You probably had a good run as a company officer. Good. Now you're a battalion chief. Now you got to start acting like a boss. You were a boss when you were a company officer, but now you really got to start acting like a boss when you're a battalion chief, and take a step back and pay a little bit more attention to what you're supposed to be doing rather than maybe what's going on,
Well, and I always said things change. We always think things change the moment you accept a leadership position as a company officer, as a chief. I always said as a BC, now you're putting a tie on. Most company officers don't wear a tie. You know what I'm saying? Most BCs, depending on where you're at. I mean, I remember Eddie Enright. Anytime we went to district headquarters, we had to stop by his office. He put his tie on. Anytime we went to district headquarters, that was just what we did. And yep. I guess it's that you're the adult now in the room. I'm not dissing company officers or whatever, but
no, not at all. I mean, Matty Daly put that picture on Facebook last week of me coming out of a building. It was an old picture when I was a young battalion chief. I had the white hat on and a coat on, and I was just coming out of a store, a taxpayer. And my top couple of buttons were open. You could see I had a tie on. A couple of people looked at that and said, family, you wearing a tie going to a fire? I said, no, I'm wearing a tie during a day tour, but I happened to go to a fire, so I still had it on. You know what I'm saying? And it's true. Yeah.
Well, so, all right. So the BC has to understand confidentiality because you're dealing with a lot more personnel problems, more behind the scenes confidential things, which means that brings with a level of trust. You can't be running your mouth anymore like you used to when you were one of the boys or girls at the kitchen table. There's things you just don't discuss. And like you back to that, the very first thing you said, John, knowing how to communicate, knowing how to, when people ask questions, to be able to, because they're going to be fishing, they're going to be trying to grab stuff from you, where you have to answer questions, but not answer questions, and there are certain things that you can talk about, certain things you can't. But this whole, the loyalty, I guess I want to finish with loyalty is huge. That whole build the team thing, loyalty. And we talk about in class, Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, who actually, she's known for a lot of things in the Navy, but one I thought it's pretty amazing. She was the only one, the first one to measure the nanosecond, and she's just brilliant. And we use her phrase, loyalty up, loyalty down, respect for one's superiors, care for one's subordinates. That's not warm and fuzzy. Good bosses, good leaders. Some of the greatest generals, combat generals in our time, have had respect for their superiors and care, for their subordinates. I think that's huge with the BC. You've got two worlds, that you have. You've always talked about the buffer, the captain, lieutenant. Man, you're stuck. You got the firefighters, you have the chiefs. You're like right in the middle almost. Well, you're kind of as the BC. You got your ship personnel. You're doing your thing, and now you got these big bosses right above you, and you have to listen to some nonsense sometimes and bite your tongue. Sometimes you got to argue a point. The last thing I ever wanted was battalion chiefs that were mealy mouth, quiet, sit on a milk crate, not say nothing. People, look, I don't want people being subordinate, but I want you to speak your mind. I want you to say something, especially if you got a good idea. But that loyalty thing both ways is huge, John. I think the battalion chief has the best opportunity to do what I just said, to build the team and to make a difference, don't you?
Absolutely. And as you said, they have all these different avenues of communication. They're talking to the deputy, they're talking to fellow battalion chiefs that are working with them on duty in the same shift in different areas. Then they talk to the battalion chiefs that work in their battalion that they see when they leave and go home and come in. Then they talk to the company officers that they work with, that are, in the hierarchy below them, the company commanders or the lieutenants on duty. I remember anytime I was sending something down, but it was a policy change, something about overtime, something about keeping people available for overtime, because that was our job to get overtime. And I would only send it to company commanders. Then I would list the 6 numbers: 88, 48, 45, 56, 38, 58. I would just put company commanders, those 6 numbers from battalion commander Josh Salka, subject overtime availability. Now, obviously, the lieutenants read that when it goes to the office, but I make it out to the captains because that's my chain. Now, those are the guys I'm dealing with directly,
Right.
And it's important that you do that.
Well, I guess, God, this is sound like a commercial. I guess if you want us to cover more, come to our class. I don't know how else to do it, or we have to do like 5 parts to this, because
Right.
I think the successful BC, the successful battalion, we did a pretty good job with this one. A little bit longer than about 5-8 minutes longer than we normally go, but great information. I think what we talked about would serve as a good foundation, don't you? Not the whole plan, not the whole picture, but serves as the.
Oh God, there's so much more. Yeah.
It serves as the launching pad. If you want, here's your launching pad. Take it and run with it and build on what we just told you. So, hey, buddy, if they want to get a hold of you, best email.
ChiefJohnSalka@gmail.com.
And I'm Chief Lasky at gmail.com. We appreciate you tuning in again. Spread the word about Old School. In the very near future, we're going to be offering some. We've had this request, some Old School helmet decals that are going to be pretty freaking cool.
Yes.
Design's pretty cool. We've got some help from We Love Them Dingus Fire, Nick Dingus and Jeff Bryant from Sublette and Amboy, Illinois. But the Dingus Fire is growing. They're huge. They're taking over the country. And thank God, because they're a great business. We love them dearly. They take care of firefighters. Yep. They're both firefighters. But Dingus, I think, is going to do that for us, John. But anyway, that being said, we hope to see you, at FDIC. We're going to have more of these coming out. There's some more new ones here as we keep tacking them on. John and I always ask you at the end of every one of these episodes to please keep the men and women in our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. And remember, never forgetting means just that, never forgetting.